That's my design. I know I stole it. When Jewelry Empire CEO's secret destroyed Single Dad's life. They say diamonds are forever, but some secrets can shatter even the hardest stones. Tonight, you'll witness how a stolen dream, a father's desperate love, and one little girl's courage transformed two broken souls into something neither thought possible. If this story touches your heart, please hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up and tell us in the comments what family means to you. Now let's discover how love can bloom even from the deepest betrayal. The emergency room lights of Boston Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Tom Mitchell's weathered hands as he paced the waiting area, his work boots squeaking against the sterile linoleum. The acrid smell of disinfectant couldn't mask his fear, a fear that had become all too familiar over the past 3 years since Sophie's diagnosis. Mr. Mitchell, doctor. Elena Santos emerged from behind the trauma bay doors, her scrubs still bearing traces of the morning's urgency. Sophie's stable now, but we need to talk. Tom's chest loosened slightly, but the doctor's expression told him this conversation wouldn't bring relief. He followed her to a quiet corner where plastic chairs faced a window overlooking Boston's skyline, the November morning gray and unforgiving. Her blood sugar dropped to dangerous levels, Dr. Santos explained, settling across from him with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered difficult news regularly. The insulin pump malfunctioned during the night. If you hadn't found her when you did, she didn't need to finish. Tom had found Sophie unconscious on her bedroom floor at 6 a.m., her small body slack and unresponsive. The ambulance ride felt like drowning. Watching his daughter's pale face while paramedics worked with controlled urgency, their radio chatter filling the space where Sophie's laughter should have been. "What do we do now?" Tom asked, though part of him already knew the answer would involve numbers he couldn't afford. "She needs a new insulin pump system immediately. The current one is 3 years old, well past its reliable lifespan." Santos pulled out her tablet, showing him technical specifications that looked like a foreign language. "The latest model has continuous monitoring, predictive alerts, smartphone integration. It could prevent episodes like this morning." "How much?" The question came out rougher than intended. $22,000. Insurance typically covers 60%, but Dr. Santos's pause carried the weight of bureaucratic reality. "Given your current coverage and Sophie's pre-existing condition status, you're looking at approximately $15,000 out of pocket." $15,000. Tom's monthly income barely covered their basic expenses, even with the custom jewelry repairs he took on weekends. He'd been slowly chipping away at Sophie's previous medical bills, but this would bury them completely. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. "Her current pump might last another few weeks, but it's unpredictable. Each malfunction increases the risk of diabetic coma or worse." Tom stared out the window at the cities where he'd once dreamed of building something beautiful, something lasting. 10 years ago, he'd been Thomas Mitchell, rising jewelry designer, creating pieces that captured love stories in precious metals and stones. His Eternal Bonds collection had been revolutionary engagement rings and wedding sets that evolved with relationship settings that could be modified as couples grew and changed together. Then Marcus Holloway, his mentor and business partner, had vanished overnight with every design, every sketch, every innovation Tom had poured his soul into creating. 6 months later, Eternal Bonds launched under Marcus's name through Sterling Luxury, becoming the most sought-after bridal collection in New England. Tom had tried to fight it legally, but Marcus had connections. Money lawyers who made Tom's stolen work disappear into patent filings and corporate acquisitions. The betrayal had cost him everything: his workshop, his reputation, his faith in the industry he'd loved since childhood. Now he was just Tom Mitchell, jewelry repair specialist, fixing other people's broken treasures while his own daughter's life hung in the balance. "Can I see her?" he asked Dr. Santos. "Of course. She's been asking for you." Sophie looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her auburn hair spread across white pillows like spilled sunlight. IVs snaked from her thin arms to machines that beeped with mechanical reassurance, measuring the delicate chemistry keeping his daughter alive. "Daddy." Her voice was whisper-soft, but alert green eyes tracking to his face with the mature focus that 8-year-old children shouldn't need to possess. "Hey, Princess." Tom settled into the chair beside her bed, taking her hand carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, scared." Sophie's honesty always caught him off guard. Other children might lie about being fine, but Sophie faced her condition with courage that humbled him daily. The pump stopped working again, didn't it? Yeah, sweetheart. But Dr. Santos says they can fix you up with something even better. Sophie studied his face with the perception of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for survival clues. Something expensive. Tom's throat tightened. He tried to shield her from financial stress, but Sophie was too observant, too intelligent to believe in fairy tales when medical bills arrived monthly. We'll figure it out, he said, the promise feeling hollow even as he spoke it. I have an idea, Sophie said, suddenly her voice gaining strength. Remember Mama's ring? The one you keep in the special box? Tom's chest constricted. Sarah's engagement ring, the last piece of jewelry he'd created before everything fell apart. He designed it during their courtship, crafting every detail to capture Sarah's gentle spirit and fierce determination. She'd worn it through their wedding, through Sophie's birth, through the brief happiness they'd shared before cancer stole her away when Sophie was only 5. Sophie, that ring is special, I know, but Mama wouldn't want me to be sick when there's something that could help. Sophie's grip on his hand tightened with surprising strength. She used to tell me that love isn't about keeping things, it's about letting them go when someone needs them more. The wisdom in his 8-year-old daughter's words hit Tom like a physical blow. Sarah had indeed said something similar during her final weeks, insisting that holding on to material things mattered less than creating space for new love to grow. But selling the ring meant letting go of the last tangible connection to Sarah, the final reminder of who he'd been before loss and betrayal redefined him. It also meant admitting defeat, acknowledging that 10 years after Marcus's theft, he still couldn't provide for his daughter without sacrificing the past. Let me think about it, okay? Tom said finally. Sophie nodded solemnly. Okay. But Daddy, I think Mama would understand. 3 hours later, Tom stood outside Meridian Fine Jewelry on Newberry Street, Sarah's engagement ring nestled in a velvet box in his jacket pocket. The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching winter, and the elegant storefront gleamed with the kind of understated luxury that made his second-hand clothes feel like a costume. Meridian specialized in estate jewelry and high-end consignments, the sort of place where wealthy Bostonians sold family heirlooms or upgraded to larger stones. Tom had researched them carefully, reading reviews that praised their fair appraisals and discreet service. The interior was all warm lighting and cream-colored display cases designed to make precious objects appear even more desirable. Soft classical music masked the sound of his work boots on marble floors as he approached the main counter. Good afternoon. The sales associate who greeted him was perfectly groomed in the way that suggested expensive maintenance manicured nails, styled hairsuit that cost more than Tom's monthly rent. His nameplate read, James Whitmore, Senior Associate. I'd like to get an appraisal, Tom said, producing the ring box. Possibly sell, depending on the offer. James's expression shifted subtly as he took in Tom's appearance. The calloused hands, the work clothes, the nervous energy of someone unaccustomed to upscale establishments. Professional courtesy remained, but cooled noticeably. I see. Well, we do handle estate pieces, though. Our clientele typically works through appointments for significant items. James opened the box with practiced efficiency, then paused. Oh. The pause stretched longer than it should have. James lifted the ring closer to the light, studying details that seemed to surprise him. Tom had created the piece using a unique setting technique, interlocking bands that allowed the center stone to be upgraded or modified without compromising the design's integrity. It was innovative work, the kind of craftsmanship that marked a true artist rather than a production jeweler. This is quite unusual, James said slowly. The workmanship is exceptional. Do you have provenance documentation? It was custom made for my wife. Tom kept his voice steady despite the emotional weight of those words. I have the original sketches and creation notes if needed. James set the ring down carefully, his expression shifting to something Tom couldn't quite read. Mr. Mitchell, Tom Mitchell. Something flickered across James's face, recognition perhaps, or confusion. I'll need to consult with our master appraiser. Would you mind waiting? This shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. Tom nodded, settling into one of the leather chairs positioned strategically around the showroom. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched Boston's afternoon traffic flow past, people heading home to families, to dinners that didn't require choosing between medical care and memories. 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 30. Other customers came and went, well-dressed women selecting tennis bracelets, an elderly man upgrading his wife's anniversary gift. Each transaction moved smoothly, efficiently, with the kind of attention Tom wasn't receiving. Mr. Mitchell, James returned with an older woman in tow, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "This is Margaret Chen, our head appraiser," James continued. "She'd like to discuss your piece." Margaret studied Tom with the direct assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating both jewelry and the people who owned it. "Mr. Mitchell, this ring is extraordinary. The technique, the innovation in the setting, I haven't seen work like this in years." "Thank you," Tom said, unsure whether praise was leading toward good news or disappointment. "In fact," Margaret continued, "the style reminds me remarkably of a collection that launched about 10 years ago. Eternal Bonds, you might have heard of it, quite revolutionary in its approach to adaptive settings." Tom's blood turned to ice water. "I'm familiar with that collection." Margaret's sharp eyes caught something in his tone. "Really, most people outside the industry wouldn't know those technical details. Were you connected to the jewelry trade?" Before Tom could answer, a commotion near the front entrance drew everyone's attention. The glass doors opened to admit a woman whose presence seemed to shift the atmosphere of the entire showroom. She was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. Dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a charcoal wool coat that whispered expensive simplicity rather than shouting it. But what commanded attention wasn't her appearance so much as her bearing, the way staff members straightened unconsciously, the way conversations quieted as she passed. Mr. Pertling, James materialized beside her with the eager attention of someone whose commission depended on important clients. "We weren't expecting you today." "Impromptu visit," the woman replied, her voice carrying just enough accent to suggest interesting origins carefully refined by expensive education. "I wanted to check the estate acquisition we discussed." Tom watched this exchange with growing unease. Sterling, as in Sterling Luxury, the company that had built an empire on his stolen designs. As in Victoria Sterling, the reclusive CEO, whose public appearances were rare enough to generate speculation in trade publications. Margaret was still holding Sarah's ring when Victoria Sterling's gaze fell upon it. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Her face went pale, her composed expression cracking just enough to reveal shock beneath. "Where did you get that?" Victoria's question came out sharper than intended, drawing surprised looks from both Margaret and James. "I'm sorry." Tom stood slowly, confusion mixing with a growing sense of alarm. Victoria stepped closer, her dark eyes fixed on the ring with an intensity that made Tom instinctively protective. "That setting technique, the interlocking bands with the adjustable tension mounting. Where did you acquire this piece?" "I made it," Tom said quietly, "for my wife." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She actually swayed slightly, one hand reaching out to steady herself against the display case. "You made it?" "10 years ago. It's my design, my work." Victoria's breathing had become shallow, her professional composure completely shattered. Margaret and James exchanged confused glances, clearly sensing tension they didn't understand. "Ms. Sterling," James ventured carefully, "is there something wrong with the piece?" Victoria ignored him, her attention entirely focused on Tom. "What's your name?" "Tom Mitchell." The name hung in the air like a confession. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, Tom saw something that made his chest tight with recognition: guilt. Deep, consuming guilt that had been festering for years. "Thomas Mitchell," she repeated softly, the full name carrying a weight that had nothing to do with introduction. "The designer of Eternal Bonds." Tom felt the floor shift beneath him. "How do you—" "Because I've spent 10 years trying to live up to the standard you set," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. 10 years building a company on innovations that should have been credited to your name. The jewelry store around them faded into background noise. Margaret's confused questions, James's attempts at professional mediation, the soft classical music, all of it became irrelevant beside this moment of recognition. Tom stared at this woman who embodied everything his stolen dreams had become. Victoria Sterling, who had turned his Eternal Bonds collection into a luxury empire. Who had built a career on work that had cost him everything. "You knew," he said, the accusation quiet but unmistakable. Not at first, Victoria replied quickly. Marcus never told me where the designs came from. He said they were his work, his innovation. I believed him for too long. When did you find out? Victoria's hands twisted together with nervous energy, completely at odds with her usual composed public image. 3 years ago, I found his private files after he died. Sketches with your signature, development notes, in your handwriting correspondence about patent theft. By then, Sterling Luxury employed over 200 people. The Eternal Bonds line generated 60% of our revenue. Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. So you knew the truth and kept building anyway. I tried to find you, Victoria said desperately. I hired investigators, searched public records, reached out to industry contacts. But Tom Mitchell had disappeared from jewelry completely. I couldn't locate the person whose work I was profiting from. Because Tom Mitchell was working construction and learning to repair other people's broken jewelry instead of creating his own, Tom replied bitterly. Because Marcus Holloway's theft didn't just steal my designs, it destroyed my reputation, my connections, my faith in everything I'd worked for. The pain in Tom's voice seemed to cut through Victoria like a blade. She swayed again, and this time Tom found himself reaching out instinctively to steady her before remembering who she was and pulling back. I'm sorry, Victoria whispered. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I've regretted it every single day since I learned the truth. Sterling. Margaret interjected carefully. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Victoria nodded absently, then seemed to focus on their surroundings for the first time since recognizing the ring. Yes, Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to come to my office? We need to discuss compensation, proper attribution, making this right somehow. Tom stared at her, his mind reeling with implications. This woman, this stranger who had profited from his stolen work, was offering exactly what he dreamed of for 10 years. Recognition, compensation, the chance to reclaim his place in the industry he'd loved and lost. But Sophie was lying in a hospital bed, dependent on medical equipment that could fail at any moment. The insulin pump she needed cost more than he could earn in 6 months, and Victoria Sterling represented resources that could save his daughter's life. How did you separate justice from necessity? How did you weigh 10 years of betrayal against your child's immediate survival, Mitchell? Victoria's voice was gentle, almost tentative. I understand this is overwhelming, but please let me try to make amends for what Marcus did, what I unknowingly participated in. Tom looked down at Sarah's ring, still resting in Margaret's palm, the symbol of love and loss, the last tangible connection to dreams that had died with his wife. Then he thought of Sophie's mature wisdom, her quiet courage in the face of medical uncertainty. My daughter is in the hospital, he said finally. She needs surgery, medical equipment we can't afford. If you really want to make amends. Victoria's response was immediate. Whatever she needs, whatever the quota. You don't even know what we're talking about. It doesn't matter. Victoria's voice carried absolute conviction. If you'll let me help, if you'll give me the chance to begin making this right, then whatever your daughter needs is already taken care of. Tom felt tears threatening for the first time since Sophie's diagnosis. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of a father who'd been carrying impossible weight, finally feeling it begin to lift. Why, he asked quietly, after all this time, why do you care what happens to us? Victoria met his gaze directly, and Tom saw in her dark eyes the same vulnerability he'd glimpsed in the hospital, someone carrying guilt too heavy for one person to bear alone. Because, she said softly, I've spent 10 years trying to honor work I had no right to claim. Because your designs taught me what real innovation looks like. Because I've built everything I have on a foundation that wasn't mine to build on. She paused, gathering courage for something more personal. And because seeing that ring, seeing work that was created with such love and skill reminded me that behind every stolen dream is a real person whose life was changed forever. Margaret cleared her throat delicately. Should I hold the ring for now? Tom looked at the piece that represented everything he'd lost and found everything he was prepared to sacrifice for Sophie's future. Then he looked at Victoria Sterling, whose empire had been built on his stolen foundations, but who seemed genuinely committed to making amends. Actually, he said slowly, I think I'll keep it for now. Victoria's smile was soft with relief. I'm glad it belongs with you. As they left Meridian together, Tom pocketing Sarah's ring, Victoria calling ahead to arrange Sophie's medical care, neither of them spoke about the weight of what had just been revealed. The afternoon sunlight caught Victoria's hair as she held the door, and Tom noticed for the first time that beneath her professional armor was someone who seemed almost as lost as he'd been. "Your daughter," Victoria said as they reached the sidewalk. "What's her name? Sophie?" "Sophie Mitchell." "Sophie Mitchell," Victoria repeated as if committing the name to memory. "I'd like to meet her if that's all right with you." Tom studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of performative charity or guilty obligation. Instead, he saw something that looked almost like hope, as if meeting Sophie might offer a chance at redemption that went beyond financial compensation. "She'll like you," Tom said finally. "She has good instincts about people, even people who've made terrible mistakes." "Especially then," Tom replied, echoing Sophie's wisdom about forgiveness and second chances. "That's when you really find out what someone's made of." As they walked toward Tom's truck, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, a well-dressed man with silver hair whose expression suggested their unlikely partnership was about to face challenges neither had anticipated. The afternoon shadows were growing longer, and somewhere in a hospital room, an 8-year-old girl was waiting for her father to return with news about her future. Neither Tom nor Victoria realized it yet, but that future would depend not just on medical equipment or financial resources, but on their ability to transform 10 years of betrayal into something resembling trust. The hardest part was still ahead. Children's Hospital felt different when you arrived with hope instead of desperation. Tom walked through the familiar corridors beside Victoria, whose presence seemed to transform not just the quality of attention they received, but something fundamental about their circumstances. Nurses who had been professionally kind were now actively welcoming. The financial counselor who had previously discussed payment plans with apologetic sympathy now spoke of immediate approvals and expedited processing. "The new insulin pump system will be delivered tomorrow morning," Victoria was explaining as they approached Sophie's room. "Dr. Santos has already reviewed the specifications. It's the most advanced monitoring system available." Tom nodded, still struggling to process the speed with which his daughter's medical crisis had been resolved. 3 hours ago, he'd been contemplating selling his last connection to Sarah. Now, Sophie's treatment was secured, her future no longer hanging in the balance of his financial limitations. "Ms. Sterling," he said quietly as they paused outside Sophie's door, "I need you to understand something before we go in there." Victoria turned to him with the direct attention that was becoming familiar. No performative politeness, just genuine focus. "Sophie doesn't know anything about the history between us. The stolen designs, Marcus Holloway, any of it. To her, you're just the woman who's helping with her medical care." "Of course," Victoria replied. "What would you like me to tell her about why I am helping?" Tom considered this carefully. Sophie's emotional intelligence was formidable, and she'd certainly ask pointed questions about Victoria's motivations. But she was also 8 years old, dealing with enough medical complexity without adding adult guilt and betrayal to her emotional load. "Tell her you're someone who believes in helping families when they need it," Tom said finally. "That's true enough." Victoria's smile was soft, with something that might have been relief. "It is true, just not the whole truth. The whole truth is complicated. Sophie understands that sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings about things." "Smart girl. Too smart sometimes." Victoria laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. Nothing like the controlled professional presentation Tom had expected from someone who ran a luxury empire. "I can't wait to meet her." Sophie was sitting up in bed when they entered, her color significantly improved from the morning's crisis. She'd been drawing in a sketchbook Tom had brought from home, and her face lit up when she saw him. "Daddy." She set the sketchbook aside, reaching for him with the uncomplicated joy that made every difficult moment worthwhile. "Dr. Santos said you found a way to get the new pump." "I had some help," Tom said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Sophie, I'd like you to meet someone special. This is Miss Sterling." Victoria approached the bed with careful grace, clearly uncertain about how to interact with a hospitalized child. "Hello, Sophie. Your father has told me wonderful things about you." Sophie studied Victoria with the same direct assessment she applied to all new adults in her life. "Are you the one helping with my medical stuff?" "I am. I hope that's all right with you." It's very all right, Sophie said solemnly. Thank you for caring about people you don't even know yet. The simple gratitude in Sophie's voice hit Victoria like a physical blow. Tom watched her struggle with emotion, her professional composure cracking just enough to reveal the vulnerability underneath. You're very welcome, Victoria managed. What are you drawing? Sophie brightened, holding up her sketchbook to reveal detailed pencil drawings of jewelry designs. Daddy taught me how to draw rings and necklaces. See, this one has secret compartments where you could hide tiny love notes. Victoria's breath caught audibly. The drawing was remarkably sophisticated for an 8-year-old, technically proficient, but also innovative in the way it combined traditional elements with whimsical touches. More importantly, the design philosophy was unmistakably familiar. That's beautiful work, Victoria said, her voice slightly strained. You have real talent. Daddy says I get it from both sides. Mama was an artist too before she got sick. Sophie's matter-of-fact reference to her mother's death demonstrated the emotional maturity that consistently amazed Tom. He's been teaching me about different types of stones and metals and how they work together. Victoria glanced at Tom, who was watching the interaction with careful attention. Your father is a very skilled teacher. The best, Sophie agreed. He knows everything about making beautiful things. He used to have his own collection and everything, but then some mean person stole his designs. Tom felt the air in the room grow heavy. Victoria had gone very still, her face carefully neutral in a way that suggested intense emotional effort. That must have been very difficult, Victoria said quietly. It was, but Daddy says sometimes bad things happen so good things can happen later. Sophie's wisdom was delivered with the absolute conviction of childhood. Like how Mama getting sick was terrible, but it meant Daddy learned how to take care of me really well. And how me having diabetes is scary, but it means we meet good doctors and kind people who help us. Victoria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. That's a very wise way to look at things. Mama used to say that every ending is just a beginning, wearing a disguise. Sophie settled back against her pillows, clearly pleased to share her mother's philosophy. Do you think that's true? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think, she said finally, that some of the best things in my life have come from situations that seemed terrible at first. Like what? Victoria glanced at Tom, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Like learning that something I thought was mine actually belonged to someone else. That felt awful when I found out, but it also meant I could try to make things right. Sophie absorbed this with thoughtful attention. You mean like when I accidentally took Emma's colored pencils from school, I felt bad, but returning them meant Emma and I became better friends. Exactly like that. Victoria said, her smile genuine for the first time since entering the room. Sometimes making mistakes teaches us how to do better. Dos Santos appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, and an expression of professional satisfaction. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to update you on tomorrow's schedule. How are we looking? Tom asked. The new insulin pump system arrived this afternoon. Apparently, Ms. Sterling arranged for expedited delivery. Dos Santos nodded appreciatively toward Victoria. We'll do the installation and training tomorrow morning. Sophie should be able to go home by evening if everything goes smoothly. Home by dinner, Sophie asked hopefully. If you follow all the instructions and let us make sure everything's working properly, Dr. Santos confirmed. I will. I promise. Sophie turned to Victoria with sudden inspiration. Miss Sterling, would you like to come have dinner with us when I get out? Daddy makes really good pasta, and I could show you more of my drawings. Victoria's expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and something that looked like longing. That's very kind, Sophie, but I wouldn't want to impose on family time. You wouldn't be imposing, Tom said quietly, realizing as he spoke that he meant it. Sophie's right, I do make good pasta. And it might be nice to continue our conversation from earlier. Victoria met his gaze, clearly understanding that continuing their conversation meant addressing 10 years of stolen work, built empires, and the complex mathematics of attempting to make amends. I'd like that very much, she said finally. Yay! Sophie clapped her hands together with delight. This is turning out to be a very good day, even though it started scary. Dos Santos smiled at Sophie's enthusiasm. Speaking of tomorrow, we should probably let you get some rest. The pump installation is a bit involved and you'll want to be alert for the training. Will you come back tomorrow, Sophie asked Victoria, for moral support? Victoria looked to Tom, who found himself nodding before he'd consciously made the decision. If Ms. Sterling has time in her schedule, I'll make time, Victoria said firmly. Moral support is very important for medical procedures. After Dr. Santos left and Sophie began settling down for the evening, Victoria and Tom found themselves in the hospital corridor having a conversation neither had anticipated when the day began. She's remarkable, Victoria said softly. Her resilience, her wisdom, as she reminds me of. Of what? Victoria hesitated, then seemed to decide on honesty. Of my mother. Before she died, before my stepfather changed our name and tried to erase everything that came before. My mother had that same way of finding hope in difficult situations. It was the first truly personal information Victoria had shared, and Tom sensed it wasn't offered lightly. What was her name? Your mother. Isabella Ramirez. She cleaned office buildings at night and restaurants during the day, but she always said she was really an artist who just happened to need a day job. Victoria's smile was tinged with old sadness. She would have loved Sophie's drawings. Ramirez, Tom repeated thoughtfully. That was your name before Sterling. Victoria Ramirez Santos. David Sterling adopted me when I was 12, insisted I take his name for social advantages. Said I'd have more opportunities if people didn't immediately know I was... Victoria's voice trailed off. Latina. Poor Latina, Victoria corrected. The ethnicity might have been manageable in certain circles if we'd had money. But David had very specific ideas about what kind of daughter would reflect well on his social standing. Tom felt something shift in his understanding of Victoria Sterling. So you weren't born into this world either. Far from it. I grew up in East Boston sharing a studio apartment with my mother. We moved in with David when she married him, but the price was becoming someone we weren't. Victoria's voice carried old pain. My mother thought it was worth it for my future. I'm still not sure she was right. What happened to her? Cancer, when I was 16. David made all the medical decisions, chose the least expensive treatment options, prioritized his own comfort over hers. Victoria's hands clenched unconsciously. She died in a public hospital room while David attended charity galas. The parallel to Sophie's medical situation was impossible to ignore. Tom understood now why Victoria had responded so quickly, so completely, to news of his daughter's needs. I'm sorry, he said simply. Thank you. It was a long time ago. But watching you with Sophie today, seeing the way you prioritize her well-being over everything else, it reminded me of what unconditional love looks like. They walked slowly toward the hospital exit, neither eager to end this conversation that was providing context for 10 years of questions. Victoria, Tom said as they reached the main lobby, can I ask why you stayed with Sterling Luxury after you found out about Marcus? Why didn't you just start over with your own designs? Victoria was quiet for so long. Tom wondered if he'd pushed too hard. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was a coward. Because starting over meant admitting I'd built my entire career on someone else's foundation. Because I'd become addicted to the recognition, the success, the feeling of being important in an industry that had ignored women like my mother completely. And because 200 employees depended on the company for their livelihoods. Victoria looked at him sharply, surprised by his understanding. You don't think that's just an excuse? I think it's complicated. Most ethical decisions are complicated. Marcus used to say that good design required difficult choices, that true innovation meant being willing to sacrifice comfort for vision. Victoria's laugh was bitter. I just never thought he meant sacrificing other people's vision for his own comfort. What kind of mentor was he? Before you knew about the theft. Victoria considered this carefully. Brilliant but ruthless. He taught me everything about running a luxury business, how to identify market trends, how to build brand prestige, how to make wealthy people feel that spending money was a form of self-expression. But not much about integrity. He said integrity was a luxury we couldn't afford until we were established. That moral purity was for people who didn't understand how competitive the industry really was. Victoria shook her head. It took me years to realize that was just sophisticated justification for cheating. They reached Tom's truck in the hospital parking structure, the November evening air cold enough to make conversation feel more intimate in the enclosed space. Tom, Victoria said suddenly, "Before tomorrow, before we continue this, there's something else you need to know." Tom felt his stomach drop. "More stolen designs." "No, nothing like that. It's about David Sterling, my stepfather." Victoria's expression grew troubled. "He's been asking questions about the new medical assistance program I established, about why I'm suddenly interested in charitable giving." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he might investigate the recipients. David has always been protective of the Sterling name. If he discovers our connection, your history with Marcus, he'll see it as a threat to the company's reputation." Tom studied Victoria's face, recognizing genuine concern. "What does that mean for Sophie's treatment?" "Nothing. Her medical care is guaranteed regardless of what David does or says. But it might complicate our ability to address the larger issues between us." "The compensation, you mean?" "The attribution for the Eternal Bonds collection." "Yes, David controls 49% of Sterling Luxury through complicated trust structures. If he decides to fight any acknowledgement of Marcus's theft, he can make the legal process extremely difficult." Tom leaned against his truck, processing these new complications. "So, helping my daughter might have consequences for both of you." "It might, but that's my problem to handle, not yours." Victoria. "No," she said firmly. "Whatever happens with David, whatever corporate politics I have to navigate, it doesn't change what I owe you, what the company owes you. Sophie gets her medical care, and we find a way to make the rest of it right too." Tom found himself studying this woman who had spent the day transforming from symbol of his stolen dreams into someone more complex and surprising. "Why are you doing this?" "Really," Victoria met his gaze directly, "because I've spent 10 years building something beautiful on a foundation of lies. Because your daughter reminds me of what real courage looks like. Because I want to find out if redemption is actually possible or just something people talk about. And And because meeting you today, seeing the work you're still capable of creating, seeing the father you've become, despite everything that was stolen from you, it made me realize that running from guilt isn't the same as making amends." The honesty in her voice was startling, free of the careful, professional language she'd used earlier. Tom felt something shift between them, the dynamic changing from adversarial to something more collaborative. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Okay, let's see if redemption is actually possible. But we do it honestly without hiding anything from each other. And Sophie's well-being comes first always." Victoria's smile was radiant with relief. "Always, I promise." As Tom drove home through Boston's evening traffic, he thought about the day's impossible developments. This morning, he'd been a single father facing his daughter's medical crisis alone. Tonight, Sophie's treatment was secured, and the woman responsible for his professional destruction had offered partnership in making amends. The situation was complicated, emotionally treacherous, and full of potential pitfalls he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 10 years, Tom felt like Thomas Mitchell, the designer, might still exist somewhere inside Tom, Mitchell, the repair specialist. And for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like they might not have to face the future entirely alone. The next morning brought the kind of November brightness that made Boston's autumn feel like possibility rather than ending. Tom arrived at the hospital early to find Sophie already awake and animated, chatting with a nurse about the upcoming insulin pump installation. "Daddy," Sophie waved him over enthusiastically. "Maria was telling me about all the cool features the new pump has. It connects to your phone." "Morning, Princess." Tom kissed her forehead, noting her improved color and energy. "Ready for your upgrade?" "Super ready. Is Ms. Sterling coming?" "She should be here soon." Victoria arrived 20 minutes later carrying coffee for Tom and what appeared to be an expensive hot chocolate fondant for Sophie. She'd traded yesterday's business attire for dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, still clearly expensive, but more approachable. "Special hot chocolate delivery," she announced, presenting Sophie with a cup topped with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. "From that cafe downstairs that smells so good." "Thank you," Sophie accepted the treat with delight. "Daddy, look how fancy it is." "Very fancy," Tom agreed, touched by Victoria's attention to details that would matter to an 8-year-old. "Doctor." Santos appeared with the medical team and a cart full of equipment that would become integral to Sophie's daily life. The new insulin pump system was remarkably sophisticated, smaller than her previous device with continuous monitoring capabilities and smartphone integration that would alert Tom immediately if Sophie's blood sugar levels became dangerous. "This is going to change everything for you," Dr. Santos explained as she began the installation process. "No more finger sticks 6 times a day, no more guessing about insulin timing. The pump learns your patterns and adjusts automatically." Sophie endured the procedure with characteristic bravery, asking intelligent questions about how the device worked and what the various alarms would mean. Victoria sat beside Tom, occasionally reaching over to squeeze his hand during the more invasive parts of the installation. "There," Dos Santos announced 40 minutes later, "all connected and running perfectly." "Sophie, how does it feel?" Sophie looked down at the small device now attached to her abdomen. "Different, but good different. Like having a tiny robot friend that helps take care of me." "That's exactly right," Dr. Santos agreed. "This tiny robot friend is going to make your life much easier." The training session took another 2 hours, learning to use the smartphone app, understanding the various alerts and alarms, practicing the routine maintenance that would keep the system functioning properly. Victoria participated fully, asking questions about troubleshooting and backup procedures that demonstrated genuine investment in Sophie's long-term care. "Excellent work, everyone," Dr. Santos concluded. "Sophie, you're officially ready for discharge. The pump is functioning perfectly, your blood sugar is stable, and you understand how to use all the new features." "I can really go home now?" Sophie asked hopefully. "You can really go home now?" The discharge process took another hour: paperwork, final instructions, scheduling follow-up appointments. Victoria handled the financial aspects with quiet efficiency, ensuring everything was properly processed and documented. "Ms. Sterling," Sophie said, as they prepared to leave the hospital, "you've been so nice to us. Is there anything I can do for you?" Victoria's expression grew soft with genuine emotion. "Actually, Sophie, there is something. Would you mind if I asked your father for help with a work or project? I think he might have some ideas that could help my company create better designs." Sophie looked between them with the perceptive intelligence that consistently surprised adults. "You mean like a partnership?" "Something like that, yes." Sophie nodded solemnly. "That sounds like a good idea. Daddy is really smart about making beautiful things, and you seem like you want to help people. Together, you could probably help lots of people." Tom felt his throat tighten at his daughter's unconscious wisdom. Out of the mouths of babes came insights about collaboration and mutual benefit that adults struggled to achieve. "I think Sophie might be onto something," he said to Victoria. "I think she might be too." As they walked through the hospital corridors for the last time as patient and visitors, Tom felt the symbolic weight of the transition. Sophie's medical crisis was resolved, her future secured by technology that would monitor and protect her health automatically. But the larger questions raised by his encounter with Victoria Sterling remained unanswered. How did you build trust with someone whose success was founded on your stolen work? How did you separate legitimate amends from guilt-driven charity? How did you protect your daughter from adult complications while still allowing her to benefit from unexpected opportunities? "Daddy," Sophie said as they reached the parking structure, "are you scared about working with Ms. Sterling?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. "Why do you ask?" "Because you get the same look Mama used to get when she was excited about something but worried it might not work out." Tom marveled again at his daughter's emotional intelligence. "I am a little scared," he admitted, "but also excited. It's been a long time since someone wanted to partner with me on design work. Mama always said the best things come from being brave when you're scared." "She did say that, didn't she?" Sophie nodded firmly. "And I think Miss Sterling is scared too, but trying to be brave. That means you both want the same thing, which is to make beautiful things that help people feel happy." Tom looked at Victoria, who had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. "Sophie, you might be the wisest person I've ever met." "I learned from good teachers," Sophie replied matter-of-factly. "When are you going to start working together?" Victoria and Tom exchanged a look that carried the weight of 10 years' worth of complications and possibilities. "Soon," Tom said. "We have some things to figure out first, but soon." That evening, Victoria sat in her Beacon Hill townhouse, staring at files that represented 10 years of professional success built on stolen foundations. Marcus Holloway's private documents were spread across her dining room table, patent applications with forged signatures, correspondence about intellectual property theft, design sketches in handwriting that clearly wasn't Marcus's. The evidence of the theft was overwhelming, but so was the evidence of what had been built afterward. Sterling Luxury employed 247 people directly with another 400 contractors and suppliers dependent on their business. The Eternal Bonds collection generated $80 million annually, funding not just salaries and benefits, but also the charitable foundation Isabella had established in her mother's memory. How did you dismantle an empire without destroying the lives dependent on it? How did you make amends for theft without punishing people who had nothing to do with the original crime? Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, David Sterling, requesting meeting tomorrow, re-medical assistance program. Says it's urgent. Victoria set the phone aside without responding. David could wait. For the first time in years, she had more important concerns than managing her stepfather's expectations or protecting the Sterling reputation. She had a debt to repay, a partnership to build, and a little girl's faith in the possibility of transformation to prove worthy of. The reckoning was coming, but maybe if Tom Mitchell was as generous as his daughter believed, it could be the beginning rather than the ending Victoria had always feared. David Sterling's office occupied the top floor of a Back Bay brownstone that had been in his family for 3 generations. Unlike the warm, understated elegance that Victoria preferred, David's space was designed to intimidate. Dark leather, heavy mahogany oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who had built their wealth through methods that wouldn't bear close scrutiny in modern light. Victoria stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching morning commuters hurry past on Commonwealth Avenue, while David reviewed the medical assistance paperwork she'd been dreading to provide. $15,000, David said, finally his voice carrying the displeasure that had shaped Victoria's childhood. For a stranger's medical bills, without board approval, without committee review, without any discussion of precedent or policy implications. It was an emergency situation, Victoria replied, keeping her voice level despite the familiar anxiety David's disapproval triggered. The child needed immediate medical intervention. The child, David repeated, flipping through the documents with methodical attention. Sophie Mitchell, daughter of Thomas Mitchell. He looked up sharply. Any relation to the Thomas Mitchell who sued Marcus Holloway for design theft 10 years ago? Victoria felt ice settle in her stomach. She'd underestimated David's memory for legal complications that might threaten the company's reputation. You remember that lawsuit? She asked carefully. I remember everything that threatens Sterling's interests. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence, but it generated enough publicity to require careful management. David's pale eyes narrowed. Is this the same Thomas Mitchell? Victoria had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it felt more treacherous than anticipated. Yes. The single word hung in the air like a confession. David set the paperwork down with deliberate precision, his expression cycling through calculation and growing anger. You paid medical bills for the man who tried to destroy Marcus's reputation. The man who claimed our most successful collection was stolen from him. The man whose designs were stolen from him, Victoria corrected quietly. David's face went very still. Excuse me. Victoria moved away from the window, settling into the chair across from David's desk, with the kind of composed determination she'd learned from watching him navigate hostile business negotiations. I found Marcus's private files after he died, documentation proving that Thomas Mitchell's accusations were accurate. The Eternal Bonds collection was stolen intellectual property. That's impossible. Marcus created those designs. Marcus stole those designs. Victoria interrupted, her voice growing stronger. I have sketches in Mitchell's handwriting, patent applications with forged signatures, correspondence about covering up the theft. The evidence is overwhelming. David's expression shifted from anger to something more calculating and dangerous. Where are these alleged documents? In a secure location. Copies exist in multiple places. Victoria, David's voice carried the patronizing tone that had always made her feel simultaneously protected and diminished. You're clearly being manipulated by a man seeking to exploit your charitable instincts. This Mitchell person has convinced you. No one has convinced me of anything except my own eyes. Victoria's interruption was sharp enough to genuinely surprise David. I've seen the evidence. I know the truth. And I know what we owe Thomas Mitchell for 10 years of profiting from his stolen work. We owe him nothing, David said flatly. Sterling Luxury operates under established legal protections. Even if these documents exist, which I doubt, the statute of limitations on any potential claim expired years ago, legal obligations and ethical obligations aren't the same thing. David laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Ethics are luxuries, Victoria. I taught you that when you were 12 years old and trying to give away your allowance to every sob story you encountered. You taught me to prioritize self-interest over integrity, Victoria replied. I'm no longer interested in that lesson. You're no longer interested in protecting the company that feeds your lifestyle, the business that employs hundreds of people, the reputation that took decades to build. Victoria met his gaze steadily. I'm interested in building something worthy of my mother's memory instead of something that would have appalled her. The reference to Isabella hit David like a slap. He'd never spoken of Victoria's mother except to criticize her impractical values and unrealistic expectations. Your mother was a dreamer who died poor, David said coldly. I saved you from following that path. You saved me from becoming a person she would have recognized as her daughter, Victoria replied. But it's not too late to change that. David stood abruptly, moving to the window where Victoria had been standing. What exactly are you proposing? Public confession, financial reparations that could bankrupt the company, destroying everything Marcus and I built because you've developed a guilty conscience. I'm proposing partnership. Thomas Mitchell is one of the most innovative designers I've ever encountered. Bringing him into Sterling Luxury officially would strengthen our creative capabilities while acknowledging our debt to him. Partnership, David repeated incredulously, with the man who tried to sue us for millions. With the man we stole millions from, Victoria corrected. David turned back to face her, his expression harder than she had ever seen it. You seem to have forgotten something important, Victoria. Sterling Luxury isn't yours to give away. I control 49% of the company through various trusts and partnerships. Any major decision requires board approval, and I have enough influence to block anything I consider detrimental to our interests. And you consider honesty detrimental to our interests. I consider public admission of intellectual property theft catastrophically detrimental to our interests, David said bluntly. Such an admission would expose us to massive lawsuits, destroy our reputation with clients and suppliers, and potentially trigger investigations into other aspects of our business practices. Victoria felt cold understanding wash over her. What other aspects, David? Nothing you need to concern yourself with. But businesses that operate at our level inevitably encounter gray areas in tax law, labor regulations, import restrictions. We can't afford the scrutiny that would come with admitting Marcus's alleged theft. The conversation had shifted into territory Victoria hadn't anticipated. She'd known David was ruthless in business, but she'd assumed his methods were legal, if not entirely ethical. What aren't you telling me? She asked quietly. David's smile was thin and humorless. I'm telling you that idealistic impulses have consequences beyond your personal conscience. If you insist on pursuing this ridiculous partnership with Mitchell, you'll destroy not just Sterling Luxury, but potentially expose yourself to legal liability you don't understand. It was a threat carefully disguised as paternal protection. Victoria recognized the pattern from childhood, David's combination of intimidation and obligation that had kept her compliant for 20 years. And if I don't pursue it, then you remain the successful businesswoman I raised you to be. Mitchell gets his medical bills paid, a generous gesture that reflects well on our charitable giving. The past stays buried where it belongs. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Tom's patient rebuilding of his life, about Sophie's courage in facing medical uncertainty, about Isabella's belief that integrity mattered more than security. No, she said finally. No, I won't let the past stay buried. No, I won't prioritize Sterling's reputation over doing what's right. And no, I won't continue building my life on someone else's stolen foundation. David's face went through several color changes. Victoria, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of recent events, this Mitchell family's medical crisis. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Victoria interrupted, and I'm done being afraid of consequences. You should be afraid of consequences, David said sharply, because if you persist with this insane plan, you'll find out exactly how much power 49% ownership provides when it's wielded by someone who understands business reality. The threat was explicit, now no longer disguised as concern. Victoria felt something crystallize inside her, not just determination, but something closer to liberation. Is that your final position? She asked. It's my only position. Sterling Luxury will not admit to intellectual property. Theft will not enter into partnership with Thomas Mitchell and will not expose itself to the legal and reputational damage your guilt is demanding. Victoria nodded slowly. Then I suppose we have a fundamental disagreement about the company's direction. We have a fundamental disagreement about reality, David corrected. But you'll see reason eventually. You always do. Victoria stood gathering her composure like armor. Actually, David, I think you're about to discover that I'm much less predictable than you assume. She was halfway to the door when David's voice stopped her. Victoria, if you force me to choose between protecting this company and protecting your feelings, you won't like the choice I make. Victoria turned back to face the man who had shaped her adult life in ways both beneficial and destructive. If you force me to choose between living honestly and living comfortably, you definitely won't like the choice I make. The door closed behind her with finality that felt like freedom and that terrified her at the same time. 2 hours later, Victoria sat in Tom's modest workshop in Jamaica Plain, surrounded by tools and half-finished jewelry projects that represented everything David Sterling would never understand about the difference between creating and acquiring. He threatened to destroy the company rather than admit the truth. Victoria was explaining while Tom worked on a delicate chain repair. 20 years of building Sterling, luxury, hundreds of employees, millions in revenue. He'd rather risk all of it than acknowledge what Marcus did. Tom's hands never stopped moving, but Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders as he processed the implications of her confrontation with David. What does that mean for Sophie's medical care? Tom asked quietly. Nothing. That account is protected regardless of what happens with Sterling Luxury. Sophie's treatment is guaranteed. And what happens to you? Victoria watched Tom's careful precision with the damaged jewelry, noting the way his craftsman's focus remained steady, even while discussing complications that could reshape both their futures. I don't know, she admitted. David controls enough of the company to make my position untenable if he chooses to. He could force a board vote removing me as CEO, restructure the ownership agreements, even initiate legal action claiming I'm acting against shareholder interests. So helping me could cost you everything. Helping you is the first thing I've done in years that feels worth the risk, Victoria replied honestly. Tom set down his tools, finally looking at her directly. Victoria, you don't have to destroy your life to make amends for Marcus's theft. What's done is done. Sophie's medical needs are taken care of, and that's more than I ever expected. Is it enough for you? Just the medical bills? Tom considered the question with the careful attention he brought to all serious subjects. For Sophie's immediate needs, yes, but for the 10 years of lost opportunity, for the career Marcus stole, for the recognition my work deserves, no, it's not enough. Then we find another way. What other way? Victoria had been wrestling with this question since leaving David's office, turning over possibilities that ranged from practical to revolutionary. We start over, she said finally. Fresh company, clean foundation, equal partnership from the beginning. Tom stared at her. You're talking about walking away from Sterling Luxury completely. I'm talking about building something that honors both of our talents instead of being built on stolen foundations. Victoria, Tom struggled for words. That's an enormous risk. You've spent 20 years building Sterling into what it is today. I've spent 20 years building Sterling into a beautiful lie, Victoria corrected. Maybe it's time to find out what we could build with the truth. Before Tom could respond, Sophie's voice called from the house next door. Daddy, Miss Sterling, are you in the workshop? We're here, princess, Tom called back. Sophie appeared in the workshop doorway, still wearing her school clothes and carrying her backpack. The new insulin pump was completely hidden beneath her sweater, its discreet design allowing her to move through the world without advertising her medical condition. How was school? Victoria asked, surprised by how much she'd been looking forward to seeing Sophie again. Really good. I told everyone about my new robot friend, and Mrs. Peterson said I could do a presentation about diabetes for science class. Sophie settled onto a stool beside Tom's workbench with the familiarity of a child who'd spent countless hours in this space. What are you two working on? Tom glanced at Victoria, clearly uncertain how much of their conversation to share with an 8-year-old. We're talking about maybe starting a new business together, Victoria said carefully. Making jewelry that helps people feel special and beautiful. Sophie's face lit up with enthusiasm, like a real partnership with both your names on it. Something like that, Tom said. That's so cool. Sophie bounced slightly on her stool with excitement. You could call it Mitchell and Sterling, or Sterling and Mitchell, or maybe something completely new that represents both of you. What kind of name would represent both of us? Victoria asked, genuinely curious about Sophie's perspective. Sophie considered this with serious attention. Well, Daddy makes things that last forever and help people remember love. And Ms. Sterling helps families when they need it most. So maybe something about lasting hope or forever families. Tom felt his chest tighten with familiar emotion. His daughter's ability to distill complex situations into their essential elements never ceased to amaze him. Forever families, he repeated softly. I like that. Me too, Victoria agreed. It captures something important about what we're both trying to create. Sophie nodded solemnly, then brightened with sudden inspiration. Oh, and I could be your first official consultant since I gave you the name idea. Victoria laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That sounds like an excellent arrangement. What would your consulting fee be? Sophie pretended to consider this seriously. Maybe dinner once a week where we all cook together and talk about new design ideas. Tom watched Victoria's expression cycle through surprise, uncertainty, and something that looked almost like longing. That sounds perfect, Victoria said quietly, if your father agrees. Daddy, Sophie looked at Tom with hopeful eyes. Can Ms. Sterling be part of our cooking dinners? Tom looked at this woman who had entered their lives 58 hours ago as a stranger and somehow become central to both their immediate crisis and their long-term possibilities. Victoria Sterling, whose stolen success had shaped 10 years of his professional exile. Victoria Ramirez, whose mother's values echoed in her determination to make amends regardless of personal cost. I think, Tom said carefully, that sounds like the beginning of something good. Sophie clapped her hands together with delight, but then her expression grew more serious. There's just one thing. If you're going to be partners and have family dinners, you probably need to tell each other your real names. Tom and Victoria exchanged confused glances. Our real names? Victoria asked. Well, Sterling is your business name, right? But your family name is different. Daddy told me that sometimes people use different names for work and for family, and if we're going to be like family, we should know your family name. Victoria's breath caught. Sophie had instinctively identified the central tension of her identity, the difference between the Sterling name that provided social advantages and the Ramirez heritage that connected her to her mother's memory. My real name, Victoria said slowly, is Victoria Isabella Ramirez. That's beautiful, Sophie said sincerely. Isabella was your mama's name. Yes. Then that's what I'll call you, if that's okay. Victoria Isabella. It sounds like a princess name, but the kind of princess who helps people. Victoria's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. I would love that very much. Tom watched this exchange with growing understanding of what Victoria was offering, not just partnership in a new business venture, but genuine integration into the family structure that had sustained him and Sophie through every crisis. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Victoria Isabella, he said, testing the name. I like it. It suits you better than Sterling ever did. Victoria's smile was radiant through her tears. Thank you for understanding what it means to reclaim it. So, Sophie said with the practical focus that always followed emotional moments. When do we start the new company and where, and what's our first design going to be? Tom laughed at his daughter's eagerness to move from concept to implementation. Hold on there, consultant. We have some logistics to work out first. What kind of logistics? Victoria and Tom exchanged a look that carried the weight of adult complications Sophie couldn't yet understand. Business logistics, Victoria said diplomatically, like finding workshop space, establishing accounts with suppliers, filing paperwork with the government, and dealing with people who might not want us to start a new company, Tom added. Sophie absorbed this with thoughtful attention. Like Miss Sterling's stepfather, the one who doesn't want to admit when people make mistakes, Victoria stared at Sophie in amazement. How did you? Daddy tells me about grown-up problems when they might affect our family, Sophie explained matter-of-factly. He said your stepfather might try to make trouble because he's more worried about looking good than being good. That's a very accurate assessment, Victoria said. Grown-ups sometimes get confused about what's important, Sophie continued with 8-year-old wisdom. But if you and Daddy work together, you can probably figure out how to handle whatever trouble he makes. Tom felt a surge of pride in his daughter's emotional intelligence, mixed with concern about the burden of adult awareness she carried. You're right, he said. Together we can handle whatever comes. Victoria nodded firmly. Together. That evening as Victoria drove home through Boston's evening traffic, she thought about the decision crystallizing in her mind. David's ultimatum had forced her to confront questions she'd been avoiding for 3 years, questions about identity, integrity, and what kind of legacy she wanted to build. The Sterling name had given her access to opportunities Victoria Ramirez might never have received, but it had also required her to bury the values Isabella had died believing and to prioritize reputation over honesty, profit over justice. Maybe it was time to find out what Victoria Isabella Ramirez could build without the Sterling advantages, without the stolen foundation, without the fear of consequences that had guided her decision-making for 20 years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Sophie wants to know if you'd like to help her design a necklace for her best friend's birthday. Apparently, you're already part of the consulting team. Victoria smiled, typing back, Tell consultant Sophie that I would be honored to help with her friend's necklace. What time should I be there tomorrow? The response came quickly. Sophie says 4 p.m. sharp. Bring sketching supplies and be prepared for very detailed discussions about friendship jewelry. As Victoria pulled into her driveway, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future, instead of anxiety about protecting the past. Tomorrow she would tender her resignation from Sterling Luxury. Tomorrow she would begin the process of building something honest with Tom Mitchell. Tomorrow, Victoria Isabella Ramirez would start the journey home to the woman her mother had raised her to become. The ending was finally ready to reveal itself as the beginning it had always been meant to be, 6 months later. The workshop space in Cambridge's Porter Square buzzed with creative energy that would have made Isabella Ramirez proud. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto workbenches where Tom and Victoria bent over design sketches, their collaborative process having evolved into something that honored both their individual strengths and their shared vision. Mitchell Ramirez Designs read the simple sign on the front door, though most of their clients knew the company by reputation rather than storefront visibility. Word had spread quietly through Boston's jewelry community about the innovative partnership creating custom pieces that captured love stories in precious metals and evolving designs. The Morrison anniversary set is ready for pickup, Tom announced, holding up matching rings that incorporated elements from both their wedding bands and their children's birthstones. 15 years of marriage blended family, and they wanted jewelry that would grow with them. Victoria looked up from her sketches of Sophie's latest design inspiration, a charm bracelet system that allowed friends to add and exchange elements as their relationships deepened. They're beautiful, Tom. The way you incorporated the vintage elements with the modern setting is perfect. Team effort, Tom replied, settling beside her to examine the charm bracelet concepts. Your insight about emotional durability made all the difference. 6 months had transformed their relationship from guilty obligation to genuine partnership built on mutual respect and complementary skills. Tom's technical innovation combined with Victoria's understanding of market psychology had created a company philosophy that prioritized meaning over profit margins. The transition hadn't been without challenges. David Sterling had followed through on his threats, forcing a contentious board battle that ultimately resulted in Victoria's resignation from Sterling Luxury. The legal complications were still unfolding, But Victoria had accepted the financial losses as the price of reclaiming her integrity. Ms. Victoria Isabella, Mr. Tom. Sophie's voice preceded her arrival in the workshop, school backpack sliding off her shoulder as she settled into what had become her designated consultation space. I have news about the Friendship Bracelet project. A good news or complicated news? Victoria asked, having learned to distinguish between Sophie's different types of announcements. Both Emma loves the prototype we made, and she showed it to her mom, and her mom told her friend, Mrs. Patterson, and now Mrs. Patterson wants to commission friendship bracelets for her entire book club. Tom raised an eyebrow. How many people are in Mrs. Patterson's book club? 12, plus they want extras for gift giving. So maybe 20 sets total. Sophie's excitement was infectious. They liked the idea of jewelry that celebrates female friendship instead of just romantic love. Victoria felt a familiar surge of pride in Sophie's marketing instincts. At 9 years old, she'd already demonstrated better understanding of customer psychology than many business school graduates. 20 friendship bracelet sets, Victoria mused. That's substantial. What do you think our timeline should be? Well, Sophie settled into her consultation mode. They meet the first Thursday of every month, and Mrs. Patterson's birthday is in 3 weeks. So it would be really special if they could surprise her with the finished sets at the next meeting. Tom calculated quickly. 3 weeks for 20 custom sets. Challenging but doable if we bring in Lisa to help with the metalwork. Lisa Chen had been their first employee, a recent jewelry design graduate, whose innovative use of mixed metals complemented their traditional techniques. Hiring her had felt like a declaration that Mitchell Ramirez Designs was committed to growth rather than just survival. I'll call Lisa, Victoria said. And Sophie, excellent work identifying this opportunity. Your consultation fee this week is definitely the deluxe dinner with dessert. Sophie beamed with satisfaction. Can we make the lasagna with extra cheese and maybe try that new ice cream place after? Absolutely, Tom agreed. Partners deserve proper celebration. As if summoned by mention of partnership, Victoria's phone buzzed with a call from her lawyer. She'd been expecting this update about the Sterling luxury situation, though the timing could have been better. I should take this, she said apologetically. Sterling's attorneys have been working on the settlement agreement. Take your time, Tom said. Sophie and I can start sketching the friendship bracelet variations. Victoria stepped outside the workshop to take the call, preparing herself for either good news about the intellectual property settlement or bad news about David's latest legal maneuvering. Victoria, it's Jonathan. Her lawyer's voice carried cautious optimism. I have the final settlement terms from Sterling's legal team. Good news or complicated news? Victoria asked, unconsciously echoing Sophie's question. Surprisingly good news. David Sterling has agreed to acknowledge Marcus Holloway's intellectual property theft in exchange for your complete severance from Sterling Luxury and a commitment not to pursue further legal action. Victoria felt her breath catch. He's willing to admit the truth. More than that, Sterling Luxury will issue a public statement crediting Thomas Mitchell as the original designer of the Eternal Bonds collection. They'll also establish an annual scholarship in Isabella Ramirez's name for emerging jewelry designers from underrepresented communities. Victoria leaned against the workshop's brick wall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Jonathan was describing. Public acknowledgement of Tom's work, recognition of her mother's values, and formal closure of the chapter that had defined her adult life. What changed his mind, she asked. Honestly, I think the success of Mitchell Ramirez Designs worried him more than he expected. Your new company is generating significant industry attention, and several of Sterling's high-profile clients have quietly inquired about commissioning pieces from you. Victoria smiled, thinking about the organic growth they'd experienced as clients discovered their collaborative approach to custom design. Word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied customers had proven more valuable than any advertising campaign. The acknowledgement of Tom's work, will it include financial compensation? Yes, Sterling will pay licensing fees for 10 years of unauthorized use of the Eternal Bonds designs, plus additional compensation for lost opportunity and reputational damage. The amount is substantial. How substantial? Jonathan named a figure that made Victoria's knees weak. Not enough to erase 10 years of lost opportunity, but sufficient to secure Tom and Sophie's future and provide capital for expanding Mitchell Ramirez Designs into the company they'd envisioned. There's one more element, Jonathan continued. David wants to arrange a private meeting with you. Not business-related, he says. Personal. Victoria considered this unexpected development. She hadn't spoken to David since their confrontation 6 months ago, their communication filtered through lawyers and business intermediaries. Did he say what he wants to discuss? No, but he seems different. Subdued, maybe? His attorneys mentioned that he's been reassessing his priorities since your mother's anniversary passed. Isabella's anniversary. Victoria had forgotten that December marked 7 years since her mother's death. For all his faults, David had genuinely loved Isabella in his complicated, controlling way. Tell him I'll meet with him, Victoria decided, but not in his office, somewhere neutral. I'll arrange it. Victoria, congratulations. This settlement represents complete vindication of everything you've worked for since leaving Sterling. After ending the call, Victoria sat in the late afternoon sunshine processing the news that would transform both their professional and personal futures. The stolen designs would finally be credited to their true creator. Tom would receive compensation that acknowledged the magnitude of what had been taken from him, and Victoria would be free of the last legal and emotional obligations binding her to the Sterling name. Through the workshop window, she could see Tom and Sophie collaborating on sketches, their heads bent together in concentration, that spoke of genuine partnership across generations. Sophie was pointing to specific design elements, while Tom nodded seriously, treating her 8-year-old insights with the respect usually reserved for experienced colleagues. This was what Isabella had dreamed of: work that honored relationships, creativity that served love, success that strengthened rather than isolated. Victoria pulled out her phone and texted both Tom and Sophie Major news about the Sterling settlement. Good news that affects our whole team. Details when I come back inside. The response came immediately from Sophie Ye. Does this mean celebration dinner gets upgraded to celebration weekend? Victoria laughed, typing back, definitely celebration weekend worthy. Start planning adventures. Tom's text arrived a moment later. Whatever the news is, we'll handle it together. That's what partners do. Victoria sat in the afternoon sunshine watching pedestrians hurry past on their way to evening plans, thinking about the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been Victoria Sterling, successful CEO, haunted by stolen foundations and inherited guilt. Today, she was Victoria Isabella Ramirez, small business owner, building something honest with a partner who'd become family. The difference was everything. When she returned to the workshop, Sophie immediately launched into excited questioning about the settlement news, while Tom waited with the patient attention that had become one of his most endearing qualities. So, Victoria said, settling back into her workspace, it turns out that honesty really is the best policy. David Sterling has agreed to publicly acknowledge that Tom was the original designer of the Eternal Bonds collection. Sophie jumped up from her stool with excitement. Really? They're going to tell everyone that Daddy created those beautiful designs. Really, Victoria confirmed, plus scholarship money for young designers and compensation for 10 years of unauthorized use. Tom's expression was carefully neutral, as if he was afraid to fully believe what Victoria was telling him. Tom, Victoria said it gently, you're about to receive recognition for work that should have made you famous 10 years ago. The jewelry industry will finally know that Thomas Mitchell is the innovator behind adaptive design settings. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on sketches for future projects that would bear his name from conception to completion. How does it feel, he asked finally, walking away from Sterling? Luxury completely. Victoria considered the question honestly, like taking off shoes that never quite fit properly. I spent 20 years trying to become someone my mother wouldn't have recognized. It feels good to remember who I actually am. And who are you actually? Sophie asked with the directness that made adult conversations both more challenging and more honest. Victoria smiled at this child who had become central to her understanding of family and possibility. I'm Victoria Isabella Ramirez, daughter of Isabella who believed that beautiful work should serve love, partner of Tom Mitchell who shows me daily what integrity looks like in practice, honorary family member of Sophie Mitchell who teaches both of us that wisdom comes in many forms. That's a very good answer, Sophie pronounced solemnly. Now, can we please start planning celebration weekend? Because this definitely deserves a deluxe treatment. Tom laughed, the sound carrying a relief and joy in equal measure. Consultant Sophie is absolutely right. This deserves the most deluxe celebration we can manage. As they began planning a weekend that would mark both personal victory and professional recognition, Victoria felt the deep satisfaction of work that honored rather than betrayed her mother's memory. The empire built on stolen foundations was behind her. The partnership built on honest collaboration was just beginning. Outside the workshop windows, Boston's evening light painted everything golden. The tools they used to create beauty, the sketches that would become tomorrow's projects, the faces of the family they'd chosen to build together. Love really did grow bigger when you shared it, and sometimes the ending you feared most was actually the beginning you'd been searching for all along.